Hello everyone, welcome back to our new training. In this training, we're gonna discuss the GCC authentication flow, right? I mean, we already discussed the ZCC authentication flow in last training, and if you remember from the last training, we took Wireshark capture and the HR trace. So basically, in this training, we're gonna decode it. Okay, so to start this first. This is only, this training is about ZCC authentication decode. So we'll only touch what is necessary, right? For ZC, Zscaler, ZCC client, and what attributes or what value are important. We'll not go in very details, but yeah, this will give you a very good idea about about the ZCC authentication flow and the troubleshooting and the things you need to check. Okay. So before jumping into troubleshooting, let's just see the configuration we have, right? So this is the admin portal. My tenant is hosted in zscaler2.net. So let's just check the authentication configuration. So I clicked on administration and then the authentication setting, right? From this authentication setting, we can see the authentication type is SAML. And if we go to our SAML identity provider configuration, we can see there are a couple of IDP, and the third one is the one which is active. It's so in a green, and that's a default, and that's what we're using. Okay. Let me open it now and show you the options we have here. So the first is the name of it, right? And this is the name, of course. The other thing which is important is the SAML portal URL. So this is the URL you will be getting from the IDP. In our case, the IDP is Okta, right? So this is what we see. And this is a complete URL where Zscaler will forward the IDP request, right? So Zscaler will forward to the client will forward to the Okta. That's the flow. Okay. The name ID attributes is the attributes, which is used there which is the main attributes, right? To identify, basically, name identifier, right? So in our case, and by default, this is, this is the email address. Okay. Entity ID basically the cloud, right? From where you initiating this SAML request. If you enable this specific, org specific entity ID, so you would get it specific from this org ID, and this is my organization Zscaler organization ID. Okay, but let's go from the org only. Okay, we have uploaded a certificate from the IDP here already, right? And that certificate will be expire on August 16, 2033. The vendor is Okta, which we already know, and the rest of the details is not something which we need to discuss in this training. So this is the configuration we have in the Zscaler portal. Okay. Okay, so after the Zscaler configuration, let's go ahead and check the IDP configuration. So this is my IDP portal, and if I go to the application, right, and then I'll open the Zscaler application. In our case, I have a couple of applications there, but Zscaler 2.1 is the one which is for the Zscaler ZIA. Okay. So in this configuration, though it's a very less configuration, so what usually you want to see is what's your domain configured. Since my domain is hosted in Zscaler Cloud 2, that's why it is mentioned Zscaler Cloud 2. Okay. Another thing, under the sign on option, you would select the SAML 2.0. Okay. And the important thing is the member of, right? Which is basically dot asterisk. That means all the value, right? All the groups, and all the groups, not specific to anyone. Okay. Uh, and okay, what else here? Yeah, rest of the details can be default. Okay. Uh, yeah, then there is a mobile, then there is a provisioning options, that how you want to provision your user account to Zscaler. for that purpose, you can use skim, right? And that's something we will be discussing in our later training, specific to related to SAML. So, okay, so that's what we have. We have already gone through, right? The configuration we have seen that in the previous training as well. But now let us understand that how this flow will work. Okay, so I think, and we already know this from the previous training. Just to repeat, so that it kind of a revision for you. So this is the IDP which we have seen in our case Okta. There is a user, and user is basically a machine or a ZCC client connector, right? In this case, right, where I mean, user is the user machine, and Zscaler client connector is the one which would initiate these requests, right? Where you trying to log in, and then that's the flow. It's gonna start. And there is a service provider, which is Zscaler in this case, and then you access internet. So what happens when you open your Zscaler client connector and you type your email address? The first thing it does a domain discovery. So the first request goes to mobile.zscaler.net. It discovers your domain based on the email address you have entered, right? So let's say in our case training one at sapeskill.net. So it checks based on the shapeskills dot in, and then it figures out that in which cloud this particular domain hosted in, right? Then it redirect that request to that particular central DB and that cloud. Then the next request goes to the login.zscaler2.net, that specific cloud login dot Zscaler 123 and zscaler whatever cloud your account is hosted on. And that's basically a Zscaler SMCA, central authority, and that job is to basically check your all company configuration, authentication, and everything, right? So it checks the configuration which we have just seen, right? The Okta or the IDP configuration in the portal, and it figures out that okay, SAML is the authentication you have configured, and it figures out the IDP URL from there as well. So what it does, it send a post request to the ZCC client. ZCC client send that post request to the Okta, and then it does that, Okta or the IDP prompts for the authentication password. User provide that password, and once that authentication is successful there, uh, the SAML assertion response or SAML response is sent from IDP to the ZCC user. User forward that request to the Zscaler SMCA, right? And what Zscaler SMCA does, it returns a authentication token to the user, and ask to send that authentication token in the subsequent request. And that's how ZCC is it remain authenticated. And that's how when traffic comes to the Zscaler and it going for an internet destination, Zscaler identifies that, yeah, this is the authenticated traffic. Now, we already took the Wireshark capture, right, based on our last training. And if you see what I discussed, that same you're gonna see here as well in this Wireshark trace as well. And let me see, where is that? Okay. So the first request, what we can see, is going for mobile.zscaler.net. And then the second request is to the cloud, which is the domain hosted in. Then it going for the Zscaler SMCA login.zscaler2.net. Okay, the couple of time there, right? And then let me scroll it down. Okay, and then after, right, it redirected to the Okta. We can see here. Okay. All right, and after the Okta, redirect, uh, just highlight that part. Okay, so you can see, right, then after that login.zscaler2.net, it's redirected to okta.com, right? And once that authentication happened there successfully, The next request goes to the login.zscaler2.net and then to the mobile.zscaler2.net to the mobile portal where the device registration happens and then it downloads the app profile, forwarding profile, and and the path file and everything, right? That's the flow we understand from the Wireshark now. That what we discuss from the flow, right? From uh, the notepad diagram or or picture. Now let us see the same thing in the HR trace as well, because we took the HR trace as well, in our last training. So if you see in this HR training, HR trace, I'm sorry, the first request will be, and I think it didn't capture first few requests, right? But what we really interested in, right? So that request went to the Zscaler login.zscaler2.net, and then there is a login.zscaler2.net request, and that's what we see is a, okay, let me just make it up. Okay. So this request you can see that's going to login.zscaler2.net. We see a 200 there for this request. Okay, let me show you the 200. Yeah, here you can see the 200. Okay. So this request, we got a response from the login.zscaler2.net, and if you click on the syntax view, right? What you get the option that what exactly the response coming from there. So you can see based on this that there is a SAML request, right? This is a SAML request, okay? And in the SAML request, you would be able to see the SAML, request, all this thing, right? So this is all value of a SAML request. We can see this, and we're gonna see what exactly this SAML request contain, okay? And once that SAML request gone, then again it is sent to the IDP, and you can see this is to our okta.com IDP, and this is a same SAML request forwarded to the Okta. Okay. Once that authentication took place to the IDP, right? And we successfully authenticated to IDP. What happened after that? The IDP Okta responded with the SAML response, and then the ZCC, and then ZCC forward that SAML response to login as zscaler2.net slash sfc underscore ss. So that's how you see it, and you can see a SAML response. So what I have done, I have copied this SAML request and response in our notepad so that we can understand better and see what value it contains, right? Okay, so let me show you that very quickly. Okay, so this is the SAML request we have. In this SAML request, what you can see, uh, it is a version 1.0, and of course, a SAML request is basically, a request which is generated, in our case by the service provider Zscaler to authenticate, right, the client, the user, right? So in this SAML request, what we are seeing is this is a version 1.0. This is a SAML request, of course. It's using SAML protocol 2.0, okay? And the assertion consumer service URL, which is basically, the URL for Zscaler, right? Where that request response would come, and which we also seen in our portal as well, which is login.zscaler2.net, and the port slash sfc underscore sso, right? The destination this request is, going to is the Okta. This is the Okta IDP URL, right? And this is the identification, a unique ID for the SAML request. Issue instance is basically the time when this request is generated, and this is version 2.0 request, okay? Now, who's the issuer? This is the issuer Zscaler2.net. You would see Zscaler 1.net or Zscaler 3.net if your domain is hosted in that cloud. Okay. Now, when that request went to the IDP responded back what we see in that in that response. So Similar thing, right? Mostly it's a version, the encoding, right? That's what we see. Again, the protocol, it's same. Okay. Then there is a unique identification for this SAML response. And in response to is basically this response is response to this request, which is we already know is the identification number for our SAML request. You can see this. I highlighted the response, right, from the SAML response, the ID from the SAML response, and I can see in the SAML request it's matching. So it's the same, and that's how we figured out that okay, this SAML request response is for this SAML request. Okay, that's an important thing you need to understand. Issue instant, again, the time and the version, right? Now, the next thing what we have here is the entity ID. So this entity ID is basically the Okta entity ID, the IDP unique entity ID. Okay. The next value is the signature value, right? And we have, it has a SA 256 signature method. Okay. And there's a digest value for this particular SAML response as well, which is this, and the signature value too. Okay. And we also have IDP certificate, right? So if you copy this certificate value, save it in a notepad, and save the file, as maybe certificate dot or CER, you can open the certificate and see what's that certificate and the content of certificate as well. Okay. Uh, the next thing what we have is again SAML as a protocol and the signature, and the important thing is the status. So status tells you whether this authentication is success or not. So if it's failed, right, you would see the status as failed. In this case, we can see the status success. That means user is successfully authenticated to the IDP. Okay. Now, in the SAML assertion is basically, the details, the attributes and everything. So this is again, the identification ID, right? Same values are mostly there. This is the same entity ID. Now, what we get, the name ID, right? The name IDs, as I mentioned before, this is by default a email address. It can be unspecified or some other values. I mean, that's something you need to configure on the IDP side, but in Okta, by default, this is the email address, and that's what Zscaler need as well. Okay. Again, that's the in response to, we know the recipient, zscaler2.net. Okay. So we do see the repeated values there, which we already discussed, right? Session ID, again, it's the same value of the session index number. And the important values are the attributes. So what attributes IDP, responding back, that's important to check. So the display name attribute there, and the display name is training one. Okay. Now, the next attribute is a department, and there is no value, there is no attributes for the department written, and that means there is no value configured for it. And the other value is a member of, and in the member of, we can see this user is member of everyone as a group, and training hyphen group hyphen one, right? So these are the value, and that's something we can simply confirm on both side, right? We can confirm this on the Okta side, as well as we can confirm these value to Zscaler database. So if I search for the user, which we see there, right? Okay, so this is the user. Yeah, so this is the user, right? We can see training one at shapeskills.in. The username, and that's called a display name, and that is training one. That's what we see in the SAML response. The group, this user is part of training hyphen group hyphen one. That's what we see. It also part of everyone. We don't say it. Maybe now I removed it. This is the latest sync, and the trace I took, that's old. The department, you can see there is no value in the department, and that's why there is no I mean, because there is no response in the department, there is no value in the response. That's why we don't see that in the Zscaler database as well. So Zscaler, when you're using IDP, right? Zscaler do not create any values. It's something, it will show the value whatever you get from the IDP side. Okay. So what else we have? So yeah, this is basically very basic about the SAML request response and the authentication, decode values. So if you come across any issues regarding the authentication, you can take the HR trace, you can take, the Wireshark trace, and you can simply, go step by step what we discuss, and you can most probably you'll be able to figure it out what's the problem. At time when when you don't see a group details in the in the Zscaler database, maybe user is not part of certain group, customer may saying that user is already part of this group in the IDP. In that case, this HR trace SAML request response is very helpful. If you take it, that's how you can confirm that what are the values IDP sending to you, and that's the values matching to the Zscaler database. Okay, so this is, yeah, that's all for today's training. Do let me know how you like, how I mean, if you like it or not, and if you have any, query questions. Thank you very much for watching. See you in our next training. Bye.